Welcome to today's episode of the Bionicle Inspiration Series. Today, we're continuing our trope of focusing on colors in more color-centric Bionicle Inspiration Series episodes. So today, we're going to do like Toa no Kama. We're going to put on our mask of translation and get a bit of a better understanding about what it means to put blue in a mock. Maybe you're sitting there and you've got some awesome blue pieces and you really want to use them in a mock. You've got an abundance of them. You want to make a blue mock. It's just your favorite color, something like that. Well, today we're going to take a look at mocks that do use blue in their color schemes, see what colors complement it nicely, and also see what blue can kind of represent. Building with Bionicle is arguably an art form, and in art, every little thing you put into your thing, whatever the art piece is that you've made, every little aspect communicates something. So what does blue communicate? Let's find out together. So doing a quick and super easy Google search, blue, what does it symbolize? Blue is the color of the sky and the color of the sea. Blue is associated with depth and stability. It symbolizes trust, faith, heaven. Blue is also considered beneficial to the mind and the body. It actually slows down the human metabolism and produces a calming effect, which is pretty cool. Little advertising thing for you. Facebook uses blue because when you're scrolling, you feel calm, you feel at ease. You're like, yo, you know what? Scrolling through like this, I could do it for another 4 hours and look at another 50 ads. Why not? I'm calmed, I'm cool. Colors can have that effect on the human body. You might not notice that it's doing it, but there's a little bit of something going on. So little bits of blue like that can produce that calming effect and some of the other things we discussed. So let's look at mocks that kind of actually do that. And what specific shades of blue do they use? Oh, very exciting. First mock we've got today is by Jockson, Mr. DJ OK-Sun himself, and is called Umi The Jelly. I really like this mock. Some really clever part usages on this one. But first, let's talk about the fact that it's blue. That's what the episode's about after all. So blue, we were saying before, represents the sea. And I think this mock does that so perfectly. This mock is underwater, isn't it? It's this little jellyfish character and some coral underneath it. And you might be like, yeah, of course, Cossy. I'm well aware. I have my eyes. I can see this. But take another look at it. There's no actual... Nothing is actually communicating to you that this is underwater. There's no water, there's no fish, there's just coral. That could be alien landscape and this thing is floating in the sky. Isn't that right? But the fact that this mock itself is blue, it makes you think that it's underwater. I think that's really clever. I think it's super interesting to note that you don't necessarily need little things pointing out that it is underwater. Sure, there's coral, that kind of does point out that it's underwater, but that's counteractive to my point. Still, I think the fact that this mock is blue is a really decent choice of colors because, like we were saying, blue represents the sea, and this is talking about the sea, which is cool. We're also saying that blue has this calming and kind of nice sense of tranquility to it. And that works really well here with this. It's this specifically using the trans blue and the glow-in-the-dark blue pieces. They have this beautiful kind of marble texture to them, this kind of interesting flowing effect to them, just the way they naturally look. And it reminds you of water, and it does feel kind of calming and tranquil like you would see in a lake or an ocean or something like that. Which is pretty cool. I like that. And then that's also coupled with the kind of face of this mock, using those printed tile eye pieces there. I think very cleverly it sort of shows, the mock's kind of closing its eyes and it's just sort of drifting in the water, having a good time. And that also kind of complements that tranquil, calm effect. And so a lot of personality is being communicated. And one, yes, that is through the fact that it's underwater and the fact that its eyes are closed, but I think the color scheme does play a lot into that. So it's pretty cool. You're communicating a lot of character just simply through doing that, which is awesome. Talking a little bit about the mock, using some of the Baraki pieces. We spoke a bit about this in the Baraki episode, but actually using some of those pieces that came with the Mari/Baraki wave, which was an underwater Lego theme. A lot of those pieces were designed to look more aquatic or fish-like in nature, and so actually using some of these pieces on a mock like this is really fitting because those parts are designed to have that aesthetic, so just simply using them, a lot of the work's kind of done for you. You don't really need to focus heavily on, does this look underwatery enough? Am I really communicating that this looks kind of fish-like? No, the parts will just more or less do that for you. So look into that sort of thing. Can you use those sorts of pieces for the effects that you're after? Also, the kind of hair on this mock, it uses some parachute pieces from one of the latest City Wave sets that had a parachute in it. Really beautiful piece. But I love this part use. It looks so much like the stingers that you would find on a jellyfish. It's so fitting to what the mock actually is, kind of what it represents, etc. And it's just cool. It's a really nice part use. This is really probably my favorite part of this mock because it's so fitting and it looks exactly like what it's meant to be representing. It's a really nice part use there. Really nice work, Jockson. On to the next mock. This is a mock by Shadow Gear 6335 and is called Felicia. So I think Brendan here has done some things that are quite similar to the last mock that we saw. There's a lot of similar elements of kind of calmness and tranquility with this mock. But then there's also a few other things that are kind of being communicated here. The sense of heaven, sky, kind of flying as well, which we spoke about before, being what blue can represent. And of course, this uses some different shades of blue as well. This uses the color, I believe, it's dark azure is the name. And then it's also coupled very nicely with purple. So it's cool to note that purple actually really very nicely complements this dark azure color. I want to say this dark azure color is the exact same piece that comes on Gully G2. It also comes on the Hero Factory set Thornax. Always confused Thornax with the Thornax fruit that had the little launchers from the Glatorian. They're very similar names. Besides the point though, great color. Decent amount of CCBS and Bionicle pieces in that color, as well as system as well. And this mock, I think, effectively does that, combining the system and the Bionicle together to create a really beautiful mock that has a really beautiful and distinct color scheme. And there are certain shades of blue that came with, your friends sets or your elf sets. Definitely pay attention to some of those, because those colors are very unique, and sometimes there's decent amounts of Bionicle parts in that color, and sometimes there's not. And if you couple that with system, like we see here, you can get some really nice results. So yeah, like I was saying, real nice sense that this is like a sort of dragon female mock, so a really nice sense of the sky and flying, and this nice sort of calmness to this mock, which I really like. So I think that's interesting, very similar principles that are being explored, but sort of slight changes to the color, is also the changes to the aesthetics on the mock, actually giving it wings and actually putting sort of dragon elements that came in elf sets in the mock. It communicates something slightly different, but also quite similar, which is cool to note. So really nice work there, Brendan. On to the next mock. This is a mock by Brickthing and is called Takakia. As soon as I saw this mock, I definitely got this huge sense of some of the elements we were talking about before that blue can represent, which is trust, sea, stability, calmness. All of that's kind of being embodied in this character. And I think that's being accentuated even further with the choice of mask here. It has very sort of slim curves to it. The eyes kind of have this very nice sort of naturalness to them and sort of a softness to them almost. And I think that very effectively represents that trusting calmness that can be associated with the color blue. I think that's really fitting, kind of complementing a mask that also embodies some of the qualities as well, putting the two and two together there. It's really cool to see. But I found it really interesting because that's what I was seeing on this mock. Then we read the description that Mr. Brickthing here has said about this character. So he says, Takakia is usually described unfavorably as reckless, hyperactive, or short-tempered. She always seems to be the first to jump into combat, never waiting to listen for direction or a plan. However, this couldn't be further from the truth. Utilizing her psychic communication powers, the Toa Hukia, her Toa team, or Hukai, sorry, that's terrible mispronunciation once again. Using her psychic communication powers, the Toa Hukai are constantly linked together and able to work perfectly as a team. I think that's really cool and quite interesting because there's kind of this nice juxtaposition to what we were seeing before, this kind of calmness and tranquility aspects, but also seeing kind of the hidden truth and her real kind of personality kind of coming out. And with that information in mind, I kind of had another look at the mock and I was like, actually, you know what? Certain aspects of that are communicated in this mock. There is this nice, beautiful, juxtaposition or contrast between the two of them. You kind of take another look at her eyes, just kind of the way they glow in this one image here. It does look like she has this more sort of ferocious aspect to her. And even just the way she's posed, she does look like she's ready for battle. And also the fact that this mock has that kind of waistcoat at the back there, kind of symbolically, you could look at that as like, she has baggage, she has something kind of behind her or to her past or whatever. And that could kind of be the sort of hidden aspects that were sort of being discussed there in the little description there that, you see one thing, but the truth is actually quite different. I like that, more symbolic things that are kind of communicating stuff. That's awesome. So it's cool how all of that's being communicated here, not necessarily just through color, but also just through the general shapes on the mock, as well as the overall design and aesthetics and what was chosen to be put on the mock. I quite like that. And again, kind of relating that back to the sea, even though this isn't actually a Toa of water. I believe this is it's a Toa of psychotics. You could still look at it as, just because blue can be associated with the water, you could kind of look at it as, before we were seeing the more kind of calm, beautiful aspects of water, the kind of peace and tranquility. But you can also look at water as something that is ferocious and it changes like the tides. It can be peaceful and calm 1 minute, but then it can also be ferocious and have, tidal waves or tsunamis and things like that, hurricanes, whatever. And so that's really cool. The multiple different aspects that blue can communicate. whether it's a nice calmness or a ferocity as well. And that kind of embodies the personality of this mock as well. So really cool to see just how closely tied color can be with the personality of a mock, you know. And that being said, I'm going quite metaphorical and symbolic and all that kind of stuff with a lot of what's been talked about so far. If you just use the color blue, a lot of that will be communicated for you. You don't need to do all this work of like, okay, now to write an English essay with 5,000 words, how does this mock communicate these things? No, don't do that. But if you want to, go ahead. You might be interested in doing that, taking a bit of a deep dive into how you build this and what's being communicated. But just put a little bit of thought into it. Just sort of go, okay, this color could communicate that. Maybe I need to focus on some softer angles on this mark, some softer kind of shapes or lines or aesthetics, or using a mask that does have this sort of softer look to it. And that can communicate a more sort of softer character or something like that. It's relatively straightforward and simple. And that being said, if you don't have any idea what you're putting on is going to communicate something, just put it on, just make something, finish it, and then look at it and go, okay, does this actually work? Is this actually communicating it? And if you're still not sure, ask some of your Lego friends or ask some of your family or ask anyone, who cares? And just say, hey, if you were to just look at this character, like what would you say their personality is? And chances are they'll do what everyone does. They'll look at what's presented to them, and just through the shapes, aesthetics, colors, all that sort of stuff, they'll go, oh, well, okay, there's a lot of jagged edges on this mark. I guess this guy's a bit of like a hardened, edgy kind of character, right? And you'd be like, that was my point! And they'll be like, oh, awesome, you nailed it! And be like, thanks, Dave! It'd be great. So yeah, trial and error, all that sort of stuff. I've got so many mocks left in this episode, and I'm like already quite far into it. This is going to be a long one, guys. On to the next mock. This is by Dave Foreman and is called Rèmi Basile, that is. Probably butchering that name. Sorry, Dave. I've always liked this mock a lot. I think it's super, super cool. And I think the blue on this also does communicate a lot. This character naturally is quite timid and kind of shy to some degree. And I think the blue is also showing that. You know, and this too is a darker blue. We were seeing a few lighter colors of blue before. So this kind of deep blue can kind of symbolize, at least in my opinion, kind of emotions or kind of sadness. You know, I'm feeling blue today. I'm feeling sad, that sort of thing. And the fact that it's a deeper blue kind of suggests a more emotional inward aspect to it and less kind of surface level, you know? And so I think that's cool, kind of putting little aspects of blue in there just to kind of show that this character is a little bit more emotional or a little bit more tied to their emotions to some degree. I think that's fitting. It's also cool as well to note that the blue cloth that's being used on the back of the mock here, there's other aspects that you can do to add a bit of blue onto a mock. You don't necessarily need to use blue pieces. You could use blue cloth, whether that's official blue cloth or minifigure capes or some cloth you bought at your local cloth store. Cloths are us, if you will. Could work super well. A couple of things I like about this mock as well. I love the belt design on this. It's super cool using those minifigure backpacks as little like pouches on a belt there. Really cool kind of playing with scale in that regard, because obviously a minifigure backpack, that's a whole, you know, backpack you put on your back. Whereas here, it's super tiny compared to a Bionicle. So it's kind of cool to play around with some of those minifigure accessories and see how that changes when you put it into a larger scale Bionicle like this. Also like the tunic design that this mock has. Really, really nice, and kind of being inspired by 15th century men's fashion. Dave did a bit of research on that. Always cool to do your research and kind of base it off real life things. Why not? And he's done a great job here. Really nice kind of rounded look to it as well, using some of these system pieces to achieve that. It's super, super cool. On to the next mock. This is by Sigmox, and this is his self mock. It is called Sigma, Tower of Electricity. So the color blue can also kind of have aspects of kind of seeming kind of fast, you know, kind of looking a bit like electricity, that sort of thing. And of course, this mock does have sort of little electric-like qualities to it. And I believe it's even a tower of electricity. Let me read the description here. No, it doesn't actually say anything about electricity, but I think it's more of a non-Bionicle story kind of story behind this mock. But still looks cool. And, you know, if I were to assign an element to it in the Bionicle universe, I think electricity would fit it well. But there is this element of being extremely fast to the backstory of this mock, and that's quite fitting with that electricity aspect as well, you know, like the Flash running super fast and electricity, all that sort of thing. And so that's quite fitting. You can kind of tie the color directly into an element of some kind. And you have characters like Quicksilver or the Flash or something, and, you know, naturally they are a very fast character, and so they're kind of a little bit more kind of hot-headed and possibly even slightly more arrogant in nature, just how they are as a character. You know, obviously there's multiple different versions of Quicksilver and the Flash in different forms of media and stuff like that, but you can often look at the general tropes in media of a character that is a little bit more hot-headed or naturally quite fast or whatever, or quick or a bit witty, that sort of thing. So if that was their element as a Bionicle, or they had power over electricity, or naturally just kind of have that blue color scheme, even a little bit of black thrown in there too, like this mock here, which of those colors go very well together. It could lend itself to a more hot-headed, too cool for school kind of character. So it's always something to consider. What can the color scheme communicate element-wise, or even a little bit more communication and personality, which we've discussed a little bit before as well. Also quite like the head design on this mock here. Really, really cool using that circular piece that came in a few Hero Factory and Bionicle G2 sets as well. So it's a nice piece, and it works quite well as this sort of interesting kind of visor look to this mock. It's really nice. On to the next mock here. This is by Bluwh and is called Bluwh. We were talking before about how black and blue works really well on that other color scheme. And honestly, black works well with any color. You know, I probably will say that in future episodes of the more color scheme focused BIS, that black literally can work with any color. And it's a good go-to color for a sort of complementary color for any color scheme. But silver, I think, is also pretty good too. However, sometimes if you use a little too much silver, it can be a little overpowering. There's a term that I've heard a few people use where if you use a lot of silver in a mock, they refer to it as silver puke, which kind of implies the fact that it makes you want to puke. It looks too busy or too odd or just doesn't quite work. I don't really like that term. It's a little derogatory in my opinion, but there you go. Fun fact for the day. But I think this mock flawlessly does it. This is not silver puke. This is silver having a nice breath mint. Sure. Is that the opposite of puke? Probably. But I think the silver on this, perfectly complements this dark azure once again. And, you know, the azure here, obviously since this is the blue episode, it again kind of has similar elements to what we were seeing before. There is this sort of quickness to this mock. All the textures on this mock too, on all these more Hero Factory focused, like CCBS style parts, they have this smoothness to them, which also kind of implies that kind of quickness. And the fact that it has these fins and stuff, it almost looks like this guy is a very fast character, possibly even kind of like a racer or some sort of science fiction, you know. There's a lot of weird science fiction things, especially in LEGO as well. Some of the racer themes were like that, where it's like, in a world where racing is everything, and everybody races to survive, and racing is life now, and everybody races cars. I don't know, this mock kind of reminds me of that. It does have this sort of futuristic racer look to it. I think the blue naturally complements that in multiple ways, because there is this quickness to that color, but there's also this quite striking boldness to this color as well. And you look at a lot of sort of race cars or kind of costumes in sports and racing style things. They are quite bright colors so that you, from a distance, can instantly recognize your favorite racer and be like, oh, it's John Jekyll Jingleheimer Smith. He's my favorite guy. I love him. His name is my name too. Like, what a surprise. So I quite like that if you are building a more fast racer style character like that. Maybe quite striking colors, whether they're blue or not, could be quite appropriate there. Onto this next mock here. This is by Bluwh and is called Lieutenant Velzubn. Now I think this is cool because this is a very similar color scheme to what we saw before, but it's communicating something very, very different. So before, the textures on that mock were very smooth and agile, and, you know, he looked like a fast character, like I said. Whereas here, same color scheme, which I think is medium blue. So maybe it's a slightly different color to that medium azure, but they're very close, you know, just in terms of shades there. And then you've got the gray here, which is a gunmetal gray, which is different to the silver that we were seeing before, but again, still quite close in terms of being on the color spectrum there. But these mocks have very distinct different looks to them. If you would assign, you know, generic good or evil, I would have said Bluwh's character was very good. He's got a lot of sort of smoother flowing textures. Everything is kind of more rounded in its design, so he naturally seems lighter, happier. Whereas these mocks have more sort of sharper, stronger, spikier textures to them, and the colors are a little bit darker as well. And so naturally you go, oh, they must be a bad guy, right? Just obviously we're judging a book by its cover here. These guys could be the nicest individuals you've ever met. But simply on an aesthetic point of view, that's what's being communicated. And the distinct difference that does that is, one, you know, the slight difference in the shade of those colors, whether they are lighter or darker, will communicate different things. So maybe focus on some of your darker blues instead of your lighter blues if you're having a blue bad guy, or lighter blues if you have a good guy. And the fact that a lot of the pieces used here are naturally quite spiky as well, or have rougher textures to them, can imply that this guy's a bit more of a bad guy. So again, focus on that sort of thing if that's the character that you're building. So I think that's interesting, seeing the very distinct difference between two very similar mocks, but yet they're communicating very different things. So I like that. Quickly wanted to touch upon this mock. This is by Felix the Cat and is called F33X2. I just thought this was interesting, kind of just putting in a mock here that is very distinctly dark blue. And just also pointing out the fact that dark blue and orange... My apologies. I don't know what's happening with my throat this session. It keeps dying on me. Besides the point, though, this mech, the orange and the dark blue work well together. They look fantastic. So those are two nice colors you could complement nicely on a mock. But I think this is interesting because it's kind of, a lot of what I've been saying already, this kind of throws that out of the ballpark here. I look at this mock, I don't necessarily, I was saying before, if it's a darker shade of blue, it must be an evil mock. I look at this, I don't really see an evil mock. I see a mech that's blue, right? I think it's always important to remember that. Yes, there can be quote-unquote rules with this sort of thing, where you say, if it has this, it's more likely to be representing that. But also, you have mocks like this where it's not the case. There can be rules with all sorts of different things in Bionicle, or art, or whatever it is that you're making or building, but you don't have to follow them. Break the rules. Please break the rules. Some of the best, playwrights, storytellers, artists in the world break the rules, and that's why they're famous and make amazing things. So do that. Because while it may always traditionally be the case if you go against the norm, you can make some really interesting, unique stuff. And I think Mr. Felix the Cat is a great example of that. And this mock is also a great example of that. Next mock that we've got here is by Poor Disadvantaged and is called Petryce. So when I first saw this mock, I thought it was a Turaga. And I was like, this is perfect. The blue that we were talking about before, how it can represent this kind of calmness, this wisdom, this trusting, that's perfect for a Turaga. That's more or less their entire character. They're the wise old sage, right? I thought blue was the perfect color to use to communicate that. Then I read the backstory. Turns out this is a Matoran. And I was like, I was wrong. So again, breaking the rules, and it works well. But even still, the blue is still communicating a lot about the personality of this Matoran, and that's also really interesting and awesome at the same time. This Matoran seems like it's got a lot of history. They've got a story to tell. They've traveled a lot. They have a lot of wisdom and knowledge that they've gained on their travels as well. And the fact that they've got this big old cloak on and this kind of waistcoat and this really awesome weapon, they must travel a lot, right? It would get cold on your travels. You need a traveling cloak, that sort of thing. So it's quite fitting and quite cool. And it's that. It's the color that's communicating that. I go in and I see this mock. Before I've even read the backstory, I go, this is what I'm seeing. I'm learning about this character even before I actually learn about it. Some nice design elements on this. I love all the different uses of cloth here, whether it's actual cloth elements or system pieces that look kind of like cloth elements, like this kind of waistcoat bit here. Super, super cool. I also love the staff that he's made here. Very, very nice. Going quite ham here on a more sort of detailed weapon. Looks great. But I think my favorite addition to this is kind of the goggles that this mock has. Naturally that mask there has some gaps in it. So sort of just filled those gaps with various Lego pieces there. And so it kind of looks like, he's got some goggles on the top of his head there that he'd move on down over his eyes. It's a really nice design. One more quick mock I wanted to talk about here. This is a mock by Torrent Axe 97 and is called Osmi.Bot. Now this has one little tiny splash of blue on here, but it's really, really cool. We were talking again before about, blue representing kind of calm and everything like that, and tranquility and all that sort of nice, pleasant things. And I like the fact that the blue is there on his heart. It kind of sort of shows that this robot's personality, deep down, they're a nice guy. They're a very calm and collected individual. And I like that. And also, too, just this sea of kind of gunmetal and greys and different colors here that form this robotic look. That beautiful contrasting splash of blue there is so fitting and so beautiful. So it's always something to consider is, can you add a nice little accent color to a mock? And maybe blue is the color that can do that for you. Final mock, wanted to talk about this because there's some beautiful stuff in this and some beautiful colors working here. This is a mock by Anthony Wilson and is called Aquasaurus. I think this thing is absolutely incredible. I love this. One of my favorite mocks that Anthony's made, and he's made some good stuff, but I love this. Beautiful, beautiful look. Beautiful, menacing underwater creature. The angles that this thing has, it's gorgeous. But the colors, the dark blues, complemented very nicely with the blue there. It's cool. You can actually complement blue with blue on a mock. So maybe consider putting multiple shades of blue on a mock. It might work really well. But also, again, the orange working very well with those blues, but also the white. So those four colors kind of, I guess, work very nicely together. And so I would definitely recommend complementing your blues with some oranges or some whites. It works really well here. Even some of the lime, or not the lime, it's, I think, bright green on the seaweed there. That also complements the rest of the colors nicely too. So maybe that's something else you could do. But I wanted to throw this in here too. This isn't really related to color scheme. My throat's dying again. What's up, man? Are you okay? Maybe I need a breath mint after this. Not a breath mint, a cough mint. Wanted to throw in some of these pictures that Anthony's done, which were just some work in progress shots. And I think it gets a really nice insight into how he made this and also a little bit of his process too. You can kind of see some of these earlier pictures here, the general frame as well as building the sort of stand for it. And you can kind of actually get a pretty strong insight as to how he did this. You can more or less reverse engineer it from these pictures to some degree. So it's cool to always have that really strong Technic frame and then kind of build around it. Some of these other pictures here, he's drawn over it to show, okay, this is what I want it to look like. Now I just got to match it. And I definitely recommend doing that. Take a picture and draw over it. Get a rough idea for the size, the shape, the proportions, and what you actually want it to look like and how it works with everything else before you actually build it. And then we see some other shots here, like on some of the legs, before they've been covered up with the kind of skin of the mock. Again, it's the same thing. Build a rough frame and then find a way to kind of cover it up. I think that's a really nice insight into how he's built this, and it's something you yourself could do, is just focus on a general frame, kind of map out roughly how it's going to look, draw a little bit on some pictures just to get some ideas, and then just find ways of covering it up, and you more or less will have a mock. So really nice work, Anthony, and really nice work to all the builders in this a little bit longer BIS episode for today, but that's fine, Nothing wrong with a little bit of a slightly longer BIS episode. This has been the color scheme of Bluwh. So like the color scheme of Bluwh, I hope that you feel calmer and more tranquil after you've heard some of these cool tips, and hopefully if you are building some stuff, you've been inspired a little bit. And I look forward to seeing what other Bluwh mocks you make. If you want to submit some of your own mocks to the show, you can. You can do so through the email you're currently seeing on your screen. You can also find that email in the description below, so you can just copy and paste that into the email that you want to send. All I need in that email is some pictures, a link if you've got it, and whatever other information you want to say about the mock, or yourself as well, whatever you deem as necessary. Also, in the description where you would find that email, you'll also find links to the mocks that you saw in today's episode. Everybody who has built some stuff in this episode, they are some talented, fantastic builders, and they've built some other great stuff, so you should really seriously check it out. Obviously, this is a longer episode, but I can't cover every single mock that they've made in one episode, so be sure to look at what they've done. They are talented people. And also some of the links to my social media are there as well, so if you want to check out what I've got going on, that is where you can do so. But that's it for this episode of the Bionicle Inspiration Series. Hope you've had a fantastic day. And I'm going to end this episode by having a nice sip of water, because we all know the Bluwh mocks are normally the tower of water. Have a fantastic day. Happy building. See you in the next episode. Bye for now. I don't have any water near me.